Hey, it's 3.2, and this is the step 1 video. Our learning objective for this lesson is students will be able to read chapters 2 and 3 of While the Locust Slept or Widjiwaganug and analyze characters. So let's take some notes in your packet. First of all, what does genre mean? Genre is a category or type of literary work, such as comedy or horror. In this unit, we are focusing on the genre memoir, if you're reading While the Locust Slept, and historical fiction, if you're reading Widjiwaganug. A memoir is a nonfiction book about the author's own life. So if we think about other works that you may have read, a lot of you, I think, read Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, which is written by this young girl named Anne Frank. And she's writing about hiding away from the Nazis in a small closet during the occupation of her town. And it was a real diary written by this real person explaining what she really went through. While the Locust Slept is the same. Peter Raiser really existed. He really wrote this book, and it's about his own life. Historical fiction is the genre that is a fictional story, not real, based on actual history. But it's made up. It hasn't actually happened in quite this way. It's from the author's imagination. And so we read a play at the beginning of the year called A Raisin in the Sun, which was a kind of historical fiction. It's a play, so it's not a novel, but it is based on a true period of time, 1950s Chicago, and but it's a made-up story. The characters are not real. Lorraine Hansberry created them and made up their story. We also read historical fiction last year. Of Mice and Men is a good example of historical fiction. So these are not true stories, but they seem realistic because they are about a true time period. So the other book that Peter Raiser wrote, Widjiwaganug, is an example of historical fiction because it is not a true story, but it's based on actual history, what actually happened over 100 years ago to Ojibwe people in this area. Okay, characterization is an important aspect of books and understanding literature. When you read a new story, you start off knowing nothing about the different people involved. We learn about them through characterization. Characterization is the way characters are described or represented. Walter Lee, for example, in A Raisin in the Sun, is described early in the play as a lean, intense young man in his middle 30s, inclined to quick, nervous movements and erratic speech habits. And so this describes Walter Lee, the first thing we notice about him. As we continue to read the play, we understand that this is true to some of the decisions he makes too, right? His behavior is inclined to quick, nervous decisions and some erratic decisions as well. Protagonists and antagonists are another way that we can understand characters in a story. And a protagonist is the main character of the story, the hero, the person whose viewpoint we see and that we watch and we usually cheer on as we're reading. An antagonist is a person or thing keeping the protagonist from their goals. So the antagonist is the villain, but more than that, an antagonist could also be something that keeps the protagonist from their goals, not just necessarily someone. In A Raisin in the Sun, probably the most obvious antagonist is Willie Harris. He is the one who steals the money that Walter gives him to invest in the liquor store and sort of turns everything on its head in the play. They no longer have all the money. They don't even know if they're going to move or be able to pay for Beneatha's schooling, much less invest in a liquor store, right? You might also argue, though, that Walter Lee himself is an antagonist because he's the one who gave Willie Harris the money. He's the one who set those actions into motion. And so, in a way, he is keeping the protagonist from their goals, the rest of the younger family from their goals of achieving their dreams. But also, you might say poverty and racism is the antagonist of A Raisin in the Sun, because these things keep the youngers from their goals. So those are all possible antagonists for the play A Raisin in the Sun. In While the Locust Slept, the protagonist is the main character of a story. And so Peter Razor is the protagonist of While the Locust Slept. Since the antagonist is a person or thing keeping the protagonist from their goals, think about who is keeping Peter from his goals, or what is keeping Peter from his goals. Who or what is in Peter's way? Some antagonists in the book so far could be the state public school at Owatonna. They are not very helpful to Peter. They tell his family that it's important that he has no visitors. They ship him off to John Shaw's to work on farm placement. And we'll hear in the next couple chapters about some other things that the school has done in Peter's first 15 years of life. We'll also hear about John Shaw's, who is probably the most obvious antagonist. And you haven't heard much about him yet, but you will soon. So watch for how John Shaw's keeps Peter from his goals. Racism is also an antagonist in this book. And so watch how Peter faces racism and how racism keeps him from his goals. And watch for those other books as well. If you are reading Wee-Jawaganoug, you are going to look for the protagonist in that book, the main character of the story, and the antagonist, the person or thing keeping the protagonist from their goals. There's really two protagonists, which are Nij and Roger. And at this point in the story, they both face different antagonists and different obstacles. So some antagonists in Wee-Jawaganoug are the boarding school at Poleville, Karen Posnansky, racism. As you keep reading, watch for how Nij and Roger are characterized and how they face different and sometimes similar antagonists. Enjoy the next portion of the book. When you're done, when you get through page 44 of While the Locust Slept, you'll be ready for the next Hub Huddle and Mastery Check.